From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In today's podcast, I sit down with Birgit Pauli-Haack and Matias Ventura, the lead Gutenberg lead, to talk about all things WordPress, Gutenberg, and blocks. This is one episode you don't want to miss, so grab a drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob here again. Today I have two amazing guests with me to share the WordPress knowledge. One's from Automatic, Matias Ventura and Birgit Pauli-Haack. How are both of you today?
Hello. Really good. Nice to be back.
It's a pleasure to have you back, Matias. And how are you?
Hi, Rob.
Hey.
I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting us again.
Oh, it's always so much fun sitting down with the two of you and talking WordPress and the nitty gritty. So we've had some fun lately. For those who don't know, Matias is the Gutenberg lead for WordPress and well known in our community. And 6.1 came out, and it had its challenges, right, Matias? Just a little bit.
Well, it was a pretty big release. Like we've been doing like big releases for a while now. So it's, but I think it's also, so we're in the midst of, for those that don't know, we're in the midst of like the phase 2 of Gutenberg, and phase 2 is spanning like multiple releases of WordPress. So it's sort of, each release has like a chunk of what we hope phase 2 to be, until we're done, hopefully. And 6.1 was one of the big ones. Like we did, I think it was around WordCamp Europe that we did a bit of at least some highlights of what was going to be included. But yeah, it's been a lot of work from a lot of people. Yeah.
And it was funny because right before 6.1 came out, we had a security release about 2 weeks before, right? If I recall right. And there was a lot of discussion in the community. There were some people who don't understand why we do featured releases and why we do security releases. And I heard some grumbling about why are we doing a release 2 weeks before? Do you kind of want to walk us down that path a little bit and sort of say why you did it and how come?
Sure. So generally, like security releases always have high priority, right? So whenever we are in the year, and it's also important to isolate them because it makes it easier for hosts to upgrade, to run out to upgrades and so on. So it's always important to have them when we can have them isolated. Regarding the timelines, I don't think the teams working on it are also not necessarily the same people, so it doesn't necessarily impact that much. In this case, the 6.1 is mostly an orchestration thing. But I don't know, Birgit, if you've been like closely with the release parties, how that was felt from there.
Yeah. So the 6.1, so major release, has kind of a very strict scheduling. Yeah, that then goes up from beta to release candidate and then to the final release. But many people in the community, so why 2 weeks before the final release, there is a 6.0.3 release? It's a perfect, valid question, but it's also kind of that, that release has a different process and the security releases are actually not published until they're out. So there is nobody knows that somebody's working on it, because you don't want to reveal what the security issue is until it is fixed. So that's one thing. And also, a lot of people, when there's a major release coming out, the 6.1, they wait until the next point release comes out, which could be anywhere between 2 weeks and 4 weeks. So you don't want the security issues in 6.0 not fixed until 6.1 comes out, kind of, yeah. So you want the people to update. And Matias, you were quite right to say that hosting and the automatic updates that work very well with point releases. They are not automatic with major releases. So the security issues need to be distributed wide and immediately when they're out. So that's why there's a separate process. That's also why the security release comes out when the things are fixed and need to be patched. Yeah.
I would agree with that, Birgit. I mean, I don't know if both of you know, I maintain about 350 websites from a security perspective. So I'm kind of in that camp. And
it's quite a number.
Yeah. Quite a number. Some are mine and some are white labeled for, some other agencies that don't want to go through this process. And I got wind of it. It was funny when the security release got in, I got wind of it from one of my contacts at one of the security firms, kind of clued me in and said, by the way, you want to have your nose to the grind today. There's a release coming. And that's how I heard about it, to be fair. I know enough people at enough hosting companies, enough places. Usually when there's something going on, I usually hear pretty quickly somewhere. Somebody would tip me off somehow. But, that's just the way it is.
And we hear it too, but it's not going to be published. Like there is not a release channel for it. There is not a release candidate in any of that coming out. If it's a real security release, it's coming out. Yeah.
Matias, thank you for walking us down that process. Now, the other thing we had recently come out was 6.1.1. So there was some minor bug fixes. I guess it was like 20 odd bug fixes to 6.1 in that.
Yeah, there were a bunch of, and I'm aware of a few around like the navigation menu stuff that requires some tweaks and so on. It's usually all of these are tried to be caught in like the release candidate process. That's why like it's so regimented between the betas and the release candidates. But there's always like just the volume of people testing the actual release is always orders of magnitude different. So you get a much wider pool of people testing things, and there's always like things to address and fix and so on. But hopefully it's usually things that are minor things that can be patched quickly and so on.
Yeah, there were 29 bug fixes in core and 21 bug fixes in the block editor. And the team really rallied around getting those out, because some of the bugs kind of came out in the release candidate phase, but they were from previous releases. Yeah, so it was something that came out, but it didn't make it in the release. But if you now, so they scrambled to put the fixes in place, and then immediately after they were fixed, or most of them were fixed, they came out with a point release to augment that. So that was a really great work on the release team for getting all the people that kind of worked on it again together and push out the point release. Yeah, it's really awesome.
Yeah, I would say, from my perspective, 6.1.1 is pretty stable. I think your team, Matias, and the release team has done like an amazing job. I think we're in from the last time we spoke a year ago, we're in a pretty good place right now, which I think is really important, to be honest. And I think it's I think we're headed on the right track. I really do. I'm not, we've all heard the complaints out there. I'm not in that camp. I think we're headed on the right tracks. You guys have done a really good job of this one, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. That's great to hear. I think, I would agree. I think so it's interesting because I think most people are experiencing the work through the major releases and these minor patches. But for example, the Gutenberg release cycle is much shorter. It happens every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, there's a major Gutenberg release happening. And these usually pack 100 bug fixes with each release. And of course, every time you're developing new features, you're introducing new bugs. But the idea is that the software as a whole is becoming more mature, more stable over time. And when you look at the gap between major WordPress releases, we're usually looking at around 10 or so major Gutenberg releases are packed between 6.0 and 6.1. So that's a ton of changes, but also a ton of bug fixes, which hopefully incrementally continues to help build a much more capable but also more stable software.
Yeah. What I'll tell you, Matias, is I do the no-no. We know the Gutenberg plugin should not be run on a production site. Well, just because I like to live on the edge dangerously, I run that plugin actually on my own agency site so I like to live a little bit on the edge just for fun.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I wouldn't be so categorically that it cannot be used. For example, WordPress.com runs the Gutenberg plugin for all of its users, with the update. It's more that it's more involved in that you probably need to be paying more attention and manage it and so on. So it's it requires a bit more involvement than just updating the major WordPress releases.
I don't know if you know, just worth mentioning, both of you. You guys may or may not know that our friend Brian Gardner over at WP Engine, and a shout out to Brian and what he's been doing over there with Sam Munoz. We have a group that meets every Friday, and Brian's called it FSC Fridays Modern WordPress. And all this group does is we talk about, believe it or not, Gutenberg and what's going on and the nuances with that. And you both know Nick Diego over at WP Engine is a big part of the education around this. So we managed to have those discussions, and they're quite interesting discussions. You'd probably enjoy them sometime, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Shout out to Brian. He's been doing a lot of really cool work. It's nice to see all the work on patterns and frost and so on. It's really cool stuff.
Frost not meant for development. Again, I'm running in production mode because I like to live that way. So, So I wanted to go ahead, Birgit.
Go ahead. No, and I just wanted to say there are quite a few new features coming out or now worked on that gives you guys a lot to talk about. And it would be great if that feedback then also would come back to the GitHub issues. So to see other opinions there. So that would be really cool to kind of get that closed feedback loop back.
No, I agree. I mean, I always say, and I'm going to put you on the spot, Birgit, because I like to once in a while, is if you guys if any listeners find issues, let somebody know. And if you don't know how to open a GitHub ticket, get in touch with people like Birgit, like Courtney Robertson, like Brian Gardner, like Nick Diego. Yeah, you guys will hate me at the end of this, but that's okay.
No,
they will all help you open up that ticket. And please help us help you, right? So,
yes, yeah. No, thank you for the shout out. That's a really good. If anybody finds something that doesn't work right, and you have a hard time troubleshooting it, I'm certainly ping me on WP Slack or on a DM on Twitter, and I can walk through or help testing things to get a good bug fix or bug issue on GitHub, so the developers, so it surfaces for the developers, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, which is going to jump into my next segue because I'm going to myself probably open a ticket. Interestingly enough, one of the things I've noticed with 6.1 and 6.11 is I typically use a Chromium-based browser, which many of us use. And for a lot of people, that's Google Chrome. Well, I made a switch about 6 months ago to Brave. And believe it or not, Brave has issues often editing Gutenberg blocks in 6.1 and 6.11. And how's that for a bit of a problem?
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think there's some people in the team that I think are using Brave. So yeah, definitely would be good to know a bit more about if it's like version specific or something going on.
It started with 6.1, Matias, and I think I'm going to get around this weekend to opening up a ticket for it and get somebody to look at it because I have to drink my own Kool-Aid here. And I want to help you guys too. And it's still going on with 6.1. What happens, interestingly enough, is it comes up. And then it gives you the attempted block recovery, and then I try and recover the blocks, and it goes nowhere, which is really interesting. So I will actually endeavor to get a ticket open so you can do it. I made that switch to Brave about 6 months ago for a number of reasons, and Chromium, as we know, has had some issues itself, so it adds to it a little bit. So
yeah, please do. Would love to look like what's going on there.
No, I appreciate that. So one of the things in the WordPress space we're really concerned about right now is PHP. And I need to go there because we all know PHP 7.4 is, at the time of this record, is less than a week away end of life, right? It's the 28th, I believe, or something like that, 29th. Where do you think, is 6.1 and 6.11 fully PHP 8x compatible at this point?
Well, what I'm reading, Rob, is that it's not entirely as 100%, but it should work on 8 and 8.1. I also know that there are core committers. And I think Josefa is also in that room to discuss with PHP to move that end of life of 7.4. That it hasn't happened kind of indicates that it's probably not going to happen, but we will see. I know that the backend people on Core, they are working hard to put a post together that outlines the compatibility between for PHP 8.1 and 8 for the WordPress software. It's a little bit above my my knowledge and my technical experience, but I think that's what I know, what I heard from Tanya Morg is the one of the core committers who's working on that, as well as Jacqueline from the Netherlands, and they are working on a post about that.
Matias?
Yeah, I haven't kept up with the latest development. I think the last time I checked was a couple of months ago. But yeah, I think generally the issue is the long tail of support and ensuring like backwards compatibility is handled properly, and that always takes it's sort of like an iceberg. What seems relatively easy, like has a lot of like underneath complexity to handle well, but there's it's definitely an area of active work and development, and we could do a follow-up to see like what's the status of those projects.
And I think part of it too is once we get all the compatibility built in the core, then we got to go to some of these plugin developers and say, hey guys, it's time to kind of get your software up to date. And I think the big shops aren't my concern. It's all the small little plugin shops out there, right? They're the concern. And what I would suggest to anybody is if you're concerned about security, maybe you should introduce like a software firewall on your site just in case, right? And not rely strictly on the PHP update. But that's kind
well, like, and that's generally like one of the, I would say, like both challenges and motivations of the project as a whole is that core doesn't move in a vacuum. Like it's the whole plugin ecosystem, is the whole hosting ecosystem, and everyone's sort of like finding a way to move all of the things together without leaving users behind. I think that's what sometimes can seem things are taking a lot longer than people would hope, but it's also to like there's a really strong commitment of not leaving people behind, not leaving people stranded, and when it comes together, it's really, I think it's quite inspiring to see like the effort that all sort of like all the groups take to ensure that we can continue to move forward, we can continue to keep up with things, but without like leaving people behind that much. It's usually I think it's a really interesting thing to look at from the size and scale of things and the diligence that people take into ensuring that the decisions are balanced and take all the actors into account as much as possible.
Yeah. And I think personally, I would rather it get moved out of extended past the December timeframe, November timeframe, just because December is like prime retail season, and I have enough clients in the retail space. And I know you're laughing, and it's one of the best things that I think we've done is gotten the WordPress core updates out of December, like personally. Like if we have to do a security update, do it. But I don't think we need to do a feature upgrade in retail season. That's just my opinion, right? I think it's a good idea to get it out of there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are two issues. One is the end of life of 7.4. That's totally on the PHP Foundation side. Yep. And the other one is the minimum requirement to run WordPress. And we are still in the situation that quite a few, 7%, of the whole installations are still running on PHP 5. Yep. And some version. And it just sounds like a very low number. But when you go to, we never know how many how many installs are actually out there, WordPress. But we know that 6.0 was downloaded 25 million times. And so just thinking about a low number that WordPress is installed at 200 million websites, 7% are alone 14 million sites. Yeah, and you cannot just kind of upped the minimum requirement of PHP when you kind of leave those 14 million in the dark about things. Yeah, they are need to shut down. So I know that the hosting team is really working strongly with the hosting providers to say, okay, update, and then the hosting, that's where the update to other PHP versions actually happening. A normal user or site owner, they don't know what a PHP update is or what version that is. Yeah, it needs to be in a collaboration with the hosting companies. And getting the minimum requirement for WordPress changed, it's a really big deal, and I don't think we're there yet. Yeah.
No, I would agree. And the normal user doesn't know how to read an error log that tells you what plugin or software or code is causing the problem either. Where most of us here probably could. I certainly can. I alluded to the 350 sites I maintain, and I think I'm running, based on all the testing I've done, I'm about 75% of those can go to 8.1, and then the other 25% are going to have a pile of issues. So, and 25% out of 350 is still way too many sites for my liking.
Yeah.
So,
that's 70 sites. Yeah, that's really, if you have to handle them one at a one.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
You anytime. So I wanted to jump into a feature. One of the features that I think we're starting to get right is this whole concept of block locking, Matias. I personally would like to see block locking a little more granular so we can drill it down a little more instead of in the form it's in now. Is there any plans to do that? And do you want to talk about the whole block locking? Because it seems to be a concern amongst the devs and the designers in the community.
Sure. And if you could go over a bit, like, what do you mean by more granular block locking?
I just would like some more control, to be more specific at times instead of as general as it is now. I think I just like some more control to be able to take it down a step if I need to.
Like, but do you mean like with the, I don't know, like with the child blocks, or with the kind of locking that it does, or what parts of the things are locked and so on?
Both actually. Yeah. My big thing is I'd like to be able to put in the hands of the designers and the devs a lot of control so that when we hand this stuff to users, we don't have our users breaking stuff that they shouldn't be breaking. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for that, like one of the newest developments there is it's called like content only. And the idea is that you can define like patterns or groups of blocks or whatever you need to, and essentially lock it down so that the user can only modify the content of the blocks, but not the position, not like different attributes, like not the layout, not anything like that. Just replace images, replace the copy of a heading, replace the content, and so on. I think it's a pretty cool addition to the block locking system. That is, I'm starting to see like a few people take advantage of that. I think there's still some ideas to expand it further and make it more capable and so on. But it's really attractive because it essentially allows you to build sort of like patterns in a way that seems like a custom block, because you don't, many custom blocks before where people really wanted to control like all the pieces, they would create a custom block. And with these tools, you don't need to create custom blocks. You can just define patterns, style them how you want, set all the attributes, and then lock it in this way and package it like that. And then offer it to like, I don't know, it's very useful on marketing teams and so on, because you have all the structures in place, all the stylings in place, and you're just modifying content only.
Yeah, that's a big help. And the other thing, along with block locking, we got to teach designers and devs is stop giving all your users admin rights to the entire website. Please, 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 because you're both laughing at me because we've all been there, right? Client calls up, I want my intern to have admin rights. And then before you know it, you get a phone call saying this doesn't work. And my response is, well, what did your intern do?
Yeah, I remember that from my agency days, which are not that long ago, but yeah.
No, very good.
What I installed was there's a plugin or even a Chatpic feature out there that gives you an activity log. So
yes.
Warning the site owner, but I'm going to install that because I don't want to be blamed for things that happened that I didn't do.
And in one case I know, and I'll share with you both, I had before block locking got extensive, I have a client who runs a large jewelry store, and he knows who he is, so I can say that. I won't mention who. And he had an intern have his ID, which had admin rights to the site, because the intern couldn't do something. And I'll tell you, the blocks looked like block soup when I was done. Just like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we got to be careful with these rules. Go ahead.
No, it's an interesting, I think it's an interesting area because like block locking or all the work around like curating the experience of interacting with block is a fundamental part of the whole roadmap, essentially. Like I know, like in WordCamps and State of the War, we usually show like the sort of like all the flexibility and the capabilities that end users have. But there's a whole lot of work that's going to ensure that, again, agencies and clients and so on, that you can really curate the experience. Like the whole enterprise side, I think, is starting to really make use of some of these tools to really craft blogs that are really like, because I think the essence is that everyone is using and sharing the same software. And I think that's really powerful because everyone is just learning the core experience. But it can still be very curated, very controlled, if that's the need for a specific site and so on. And content logging is just one aspect of it. I think another one is going to be the application of like partial theme JSON objects. So right now, theme JSON, like people see it as like it affects the whole site essentially, right? You can, of course, like tailor specific blog types and so on. But the idea is that theme JSON can also operate at the level of like template parts or specific templates or specific patterns even. And that would allow you to define, I don't know, like a specific color palette for a specific pattern. And that's this color palette is only available for the heading blog when it's used within this pattern and so on. And there's a lot of permutations of that. That allows really like fine-grained control to the site owner, the developer, and so on, to establish whatever guardrails are necessary without sacrificing, again, without having to create custom blocks, without having to, they can just operate with the native tools. And combining all of these features and tools, I think, can yield very interesting outcomes. And if there's anything that I think we need to be doing more of, especially as a community, is like showcasing these sort of like use cases of like how, okay, we have all of these tools. How do I put it together for like this type of enterprise customer? How do I put it together for this other type of freelancer agency case? How do I, all of these are possible, but sometimes not maybe immediately evident to someone developing a site how to put them together. So I'm really eager to start seeing more sort of like use cases based tutorials or how to, so like ways of approaching how to combine all of these tools.
So true. I think it's getting where we need to be. So the other question I had from a couple people is, have we thought about with the Gutenberg experience in trying to fix the editing workflow a little bit? So what I mean is, if you take a document, say you do that document in Google Docs or in Word, and then we try and cut and paste that into a Gutenberg block, it doesn't always format really well. And I find you end up having to go in and clean up a lot of the paragraph or the line breaks. Is there any talk about trying to clean up that workflow experience a little bit?
So first, please also open issues about whenever you're like pasting from Google Docs and the outcome is not what you expected. It's very useful because Google Docs is continuously changing. So all our logic to how we process that also needs to be catching up, and sometimes those get disconnected. But the intention is that, again, pasting from Google Docs or whatever other service has to feel magical, that it just works, that you don't need to do any cleanup at all. Sometimes it gets tricky, like especially like line breaks. How do you interpret line breaks and so on? Because most desktop editing software, they have like full paragraph breaks, but they are represented as single line breaks. So like when you hit enter, like it shows like a single, it happens a lot on mobile as well. But it's actually a paragraph. The thing is that on the web, paragraphs tend to have margins. So like there's a few like details there that is not that easy to infer if the original intention was an explicit line break or it's just an actual paragraph. It can get tricky. But the more examples, the more use cases from people like showing like, oh, this was my source and I expected this, but this other thing happened. is really useful because it allows us to fine tune that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matias. And again, please open up some GitHub tickets to help us out here and help you. What's on the roadmap? Do either you know where we're going with the next version? What are we looking at for a new release in the new year, and what's planned?
Yes, absolutely. So I think 6.1 was an important milestone. I think it got a lot of in big pieces that we had to make more progress on, like fluid typography, a lot of improvements to templates and so on. That global styles improve a lot with it as well. I think we're now in a sort of the final consolidation lap of phase 2. It might take like 1 or like 1.5 releases to consolidate it. And really I think so some stuff that is really, some stuff is already on the plugin. So I think like we would have it by end of the year, it being like a pretty usable state to play with. But we have like a new inserter for patterns. Like there's a lot of work going on improving the flow with like pattern categories, the pattern directory, like the whole flexibility there is getting nicer. We have an experience of, so it's sort of like a zoom out editing experience where you're just operating at the pattern level. So you're defining big sort of broad sections. You're not getting into the details. And all of this is also connected with, again, the content locking thing. So it's like operating at the different levels of the site and using like sort of the proximity to the site to convey that experience. That's where a lot of the current work is going on. Another big piece, I think it's which we're not quite there, is the navigation block. Particularly like the user experience of the navigation block is there's a lot of work going on there right now to get it into a better place. It's one of the pieces that, well, historically managing menus has been always a bit difficult. Because there's so much like breadth of possibilities, right? From sites that have just a couple pages to sites that have hundreds of pages and nested menus and so on. And so defining experiences that work for all of these types it can be challenging. And with blocks, you also have the flexibility of putting like a search inside your menu and so on. So there's a lot of user experience hurdles to overcome. But I'm quite confident, like the direction that we have now, there's some design explorations that are crystallizing in something that I think would be pretty interesting. We need to really user test this a lot more, but I think it's coming along. I think outside of that, there's work happening on like the container blocks and how we deal with width and height and how we do it in a way that's inherently responsive. Again, 6.1 had like the fluid type. That was one aspect of this. The idea is to try to limit the cases where you need to resort to like media queries, especially from a user perspective. So the same is like how we apply some of this thinking to container and layout blocks so that things just flow properly and work well without having to be very explicit about the breakpoints themselves.
I would suggest even like my favorite changes, some of them are, believe it or not, around the cover block. I think you've done a really good job of that. And I've used that countlessly. I was using that in the Gutenberg plugin before it went into the release. And I think you've done some great work around that as well.
That's great. Yeah, I really love the cover block myself. It's and I think like we're really at a phase where like essentially consolidating all the features and how they like break into each other. For example, like using cover blocks in a query block, like having query patterns that leverage cover block and use it for feature images. And like there's a lot of like just using all the tools together. That's and sometimes like that creates some friction. So like really smoothing out those frictions is one of the emphasis of at least what remains of phase 2 now. I think the other thing is really around the like gradual adoption. There's going to be like the ability to import a widget area from like the classic WordPress experience, being able to just import that into a template part. And all of that sort of makes the way all of these tools adoptable by either existing sites or new sites in ways that make sense.
Thanks for sharing that, Birgit. Have you heard in your travels what people are looking for in the next release at all, or?
Well, definitely a stabilizing of all the good things that come with the site editor. And I have seen some of the designs to introduce a browse mode for, and with that also kind of a revamp on the left navigation in the design tools. So there is a little bit more consistency in how the admin menus are working, and also, of course, put in additional menu items for the template parts and for the styles and that. There are some great things in the works. Of course, there were also the block locking parts, but the content locking is really taking off. I hear that, and people embrace that quite nicely. And I had not thought about it, but Matias talked about it, that you don't need any custom blocks if you just want to lock down some of the experiences. And that is actually a great help to communicate that to the extenders or to agency developers and freelancers, that they don't have to kind of get into development. They're just using the patterns and the locks for that. That's a great addition, and I'm probably going to write about that a bit. But there are quite a few refinery. I'm looking forward to the new navigation handling of things, because what I see the team is doing is using the space that's in the sidebar to actually have a little bit more space to do menus right on the fly, so you don't have to kind of crap it all into that one little block that's on top of it. And you can't. Yeah, that was one of the things that were really hard to handle, where the different, okay, when I click here, something else pops up, because the mouse point didn't go quite as accurate to that, so it was very jumbled in there. So using that additional space that's in the sidebar is definitely improving whatever you want to do with a navigation block or navigation creation at all, and then have the additional menus and so on available right from the editor. That is really cool.
So true. And one of the things you touched on was the admin dashboard, and I have to go there.
Yes, go there.
I think we need to go to these plugin developers, and I understand it's a business for them, and I get it. But we gotta stop all the stuff they're dumping in the dashboard, because from my standpoint, it becomes really frustrating. So what all us people in the know start doing is running plugins to stop all the stuff in the dashboard.
Yeah.
So they're not really buying themselves anything in terms of advertising, and they're not really buying themselves anything in terms of getting the word out. And I just think it's the wrong way to do it, personally.
Yeah. But right now we don't have any way to kind of shut that down, because the software itself is open to extenders. So there are rules that are in the plugin guidelines, but it doesn't prevent people to add things to the menu items, to the left-hand menu, or to the notification screen. There has been efforts to rewrite the notification API that plugins can use, but that is still in the design phase, and there are some discussions there, but I think they have been stalled a little bit. But that's definitely something that is on a lot of people's minds, but there are no contributors right now really working on it.
Well, so I think like this really gets, I think a lot of these topics are really, and what we have been outlining as what phase 3 is going to be. Like phase 3 like involves a lot of things, but part of what it's going to do is like improve workflows around the enter admin experience. Workflows for getting into the editor, like how plugins extend the admin and so on. And part of what we're doing, I think, with phase 2 now, especially the browse mode that was mentioned, is to start to figure out what works, what part of these pathfinding models work the best, and defining sort of like what semantics they should carry. Because I think the issue you get when plugins extend the admin in all sort of arbitrary ways is not really so much about like stopping that, because that's part of the nature of the software being so extensible and is a very important part of the experience. I think it's more about like establishing like more semantic guardrails so that people can, and I think in the editor we have done some of these, like if you're a plugin, you can, and you're extending like the post-publish flow, like you use certain APIs. If you're extending the pre-publish, you use another one. If you're extending a blog, you use other things. If you're registering your own editor plugin, there's a place for those, and so on and so forth. Some of those concepts can also be applied to the rest of the admin, whether it's notifications, whether it's defining, we need to sort of be defining more semantic areas for what is content, what is design, what is settings, and so on. So I think that's the way that we help sort of guide the whole ecosystem to doing things more consistently, more in ways that are that you don't get conflicts between plugins or fights between plugins and so on, is by, I think, adding more semantics to the experience. So there's some of that certainly that's going to start happening more with phase 3, I think.
Is there any plans to tackle the media library in phase 3?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, because even in so right now we're introducing, it's not merged yet, but it will be merged in like the next days or week, which adds like a media panel to the inserter. So the inserter has blocks, patterns, and reusable blocks. It's going to have one for media, so that you can quickly drag like pictures into the cover block and replace the background, or like you can sort of navigate your media library and just drag things into patterns, or drag images into the canvas and just have the image block inserted and so on. And that's one way to start identifying what are the things that the media library as a whole needs to start, how it needs to start working better integrated with these elements, how we should integrate Openverse into the experience, how we should make it extensible. Like this media panel will have like filters for media types, so you can see like images or videos, audio, and so on. But this needs to be extensible. So how do we establish this in a way that then allow us to ite on the media library itself more? The media library itself will probably also be something to look at during phase 3, because it touches upon all these workflow issues. And there's a lot that we could do, like not just in integration with the editor, but also like in really helping define, like one of the main topics of phase 3 is, I think the way that it's been described is sort of like multiplayer environment. And that's because like there's stuff like real-time collaboration that go into it, but it's also like asynchronous collaboration. And the media library involves a lot of these workflows, like especially in larger teams where you have like marketers that define content and other people that define like the images and so on, and like how all of those workflows can work. How can you sort of, if you're someone whose responsibility is just to like select and add the media, how can you be like in an editing environment where that's the only thing that's highlighted for you? So you're just focused on sort of replacing the images, and you cannot disturb the content of the post. And you can do that simultaneously while someone else is editing the post, or it can be done asynchronously as well. So there's a lot of interesting parts of workflows that I think touch on where the media library how it should evolve, how it should become better.
Yeah, and I'm glad you spent some time on workflow because most of our sites now are very content heavy, and workflow is becoming more and more and more important to site owners. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So we've kind of touched on a lot of stuff. I thank both of you for your time. I would assume the best place to get a hold of either of you is probably the make.wordpress Slack channel, I would think.
Yeah, that should be fine. I'm mostly there on Twitter as well, or you can also like go to my website and email, and also on GitHub. Like GitHub is where a lot of the work is happening, so it's easy to engage there as well.
Yeah, and Birgit, for you, probably the Slack channel or Twitter, I would think, so far. Not mastered on yet.
Well, it's definitely the WordPress make Slack and Twitter. DMs are open. I also have a Mastodon account. It's on the pinned tweet on my profile on Twitter at BPH.
Okay.
So I'm also, but you can always kind of connect also in private messaging. Yeah, I don't have that's all open. Must Gutenberg Times at Gutenberg Times on Twitter also as a Mastodon account, but it's also still we're gonna be on Twitter because that's the big place now for now. We don't know how it is tomorrow, but today I'm on Twitter.
I have not gone the Mastodon route yet, but I think I'm going to as well. So
yeah, but think of it, you need to announce your space before you can leave.
Yes. Thank you both for your time and for sharing all your insights. It is always such a pleasure. Thank you, Matias. Thank you, Birgit.
Likewise, thank you for the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting us, Rob. It's always a great pleasure. Thank you.
It sure is. Thank you. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. A very special thank you to Matias and Birgit for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.